it's going to provide Ukraine a high capability that it doesn't have already. I think what Biden is trying to say here is that, in essence, Russia don't take this as a threat from the U.S. Just say, just take it as a way to an effort to end the war.
US President Joe Biden has announced his decision to send 31 battle tanks to fend off Russian forces in Ukraine, just hours after Germany said it would also send 14 of its Leopard 2 tanks to the battlefield. Speaking at a press conference shortly after the announcement, Biden defended the decision and argued that it would not pose an offensive threat to Moscow. Now, earlier I spoke to Caitlin Doornbos, Pentagon reporter at Stars and Stripes, who reaffirmed the tanks shouldn't be seen as a threat by Russia.
Well, I can only say that it's going to provide Ukraine a high capability that it doesn't have already. I think what Biden is trying to say here is that, in essence, Russia don't take this as a threat from the U.S. Just say, just take it as a way to um, an effort to end the war.
Mm. But Moscow, they don't see it like that, do they? They say that this move by the US and Germany does escalate the conflict. I mean, I suppose it's inevitable, really, isn't it?
Right. I mean, every time the US sends a package or any of the Western partners send packages, Russia takes it as a personal attack, as an offensive threat against its own nation. That's just Russia's game plan. And yes, I mean, it is capabilities that are geared towards, of course, sending Russia back into Russia and away from the Ukrainian territory. But that's kind of the way conflict goes.
Mm. Um, and can you explain about the tanks themselves? Because the Americans hadn't been that keen before. They'd said that the tanks were too complex and difficult to maintain. And it's going to be months before they arrive anyway. Just explain what it is about these tanks that makes this necessary.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that is one of the most interesting pieces of this case. Just 5 days ago, the Pentagon was telling us reporters here in Washington, D.C., that this would be an unrealistic capability to send right now. Well, they turn around today and say, well, we're going to send them, but we're not going to send them for another year. Theoretically, the battleground might look different then. The reason why they are different and less desirable for the battlefront today is because they run on gas turbine engines, which take jet fuel, which obviously is a lot harder to get downrange than the more accessible regular diesel
Mm.
fuel that is used by the other weapons. The diesel engines are in the UK's Challenger 2 tanks that they're sending, and also in Germany's Leopard 2 tanks that they are sending. But that US capability, while those US tanks are a lot more powerful and can travel further distances at higher speeds,
Mm.
they that capability with the jet fuel does make it a little bit unreasonable to send.
Mm. And presumably the Ukrainians will need to be trained in using these tanks. Who's going to do that?
Well, the US will likely do that training because they're the only nation that uses this platform. They've designed the platform themselves. President Biden has said that that training will take place in somewhere in Europe, but not in Ukraine, obviously, because the country has pledged not to put American boots on the ground. But that's similar to what the United States has been doing in Germany and elsewhere with its Patriot missile batteries and even howitzers that it had sent last summer.
And just finally, American people themselves, is this something that they support?
Largely, there's still a lot of support for Ukraine and sending weapons to Ukraine among the American general public. Um, there is some frustration among Republicans that President Biden hasn't been forceful enough and hasn't been sending enough powerful weapons sooner.
Mm.
than now that could have ended the war, months ago. And then there's also Republicans on the other end of the spectrum who say enough is enough. We're not voting for any more money for Ukraine. And that's coming from the far right advocates, the ones that were hardcore supporters of former President Donald Trump, for
Mm.
example.
That was Caitlin Doornbos, Pentagon reporter at Stars and Stripes. It's a daily military newspaper that focuses on matters affecting the US armed forces.
She's the right person to speak to. Let's take